It was a dusty afternoon in a tiny little town called Rusty Hollow. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and not much happens, at least, that's what people thought. The sun was dropping down low in the sky, turning everything a pretty orange color, like someone spilled paint all over the clouds. The air smelled like dirt and dry grass, and a soft wind was blowing little bits of dust around the streets. Out from a small, cozy house stepped Clara Thompson. She was an older lady with gray hair tied back in a neat bun. In her hand, she held a cane, a long, skinny stick she used to tap the ground in front of her. Tap, tap, tap it went as she moved. Why did she need it? Because Clara couldn't see anything. Not the bright orange sky, not the dusty road, not even her own feet. She'd been blind ever since she was a little girl. Her eyes didn't work, but Clara? She didn't let that stop her. She was tough in her own quiet way. Now, Clara wasn't alone on this dusty afternoon. Right next to her, walking close by her side, was her dog, Max. Max wasn't just any dog, he was big, with shaggy fur that looked soft and messy. His fur was mostly brown, but there were little patches of gray starting to show up, especially around his face. He was getting older, sure, but if you looked at his eyes. Whoa! They were sharp and bright, like a hawk flying high in the sky, watching everything below. Max didn't miss a thing. He stayed right by Clara, guiding her with every step, making sure she didn't bump into anything or trip. Clara and Max made a funny pair, if you think about it. She was small and quiet, with her cane going tap, tap, tap. He was big and furry, padding along silently next to her. They didn't look like much to most people in Rusty Hollow. The folks in town, old men at the gas station, ladies chatting outside the diner, kids riding rusty bikes, they'd see Clara and Max walking by and just shrug. "Oh, that's the poor blind lady," they'd whisper to each other. "She can't do much, can she? All alone with that old dog. Poor thing." That's what they said about Clara. Poor thing. They thought she was weak because she couldn't see. They thought she was just some quiet lady who stayed out of trouble. And Max? Oh, they'd look at him and smile. "What a sweet old pup," they'd say. "Look at him, wagging his tail. He's probably too old to even chase a ball anymore." They'd laugh a little, pat his head if they got close, and then forget all about him. To them, Max was just a regular dog, a nice, lazy one who helped Clara get around. Nothing special. But here's the secret, and it's a big one. Those people in Rusty Hollow? They didn't know the real story. Not even close. Clara wasn't just some poor blind lady. And Max? He wasn't just a sweet old pup. There was something huge hiding behind their quiet little walks. Something nobody in town could have guessed, not in a million years. Clara's calm steps and Max's steady paws. They were hiding a mystery, a big, exciting one. What was it? Oh, you're gonna love this. Stick around, because I'm about to tell you everything, step by step, and it's gonna blow your mind. Let's slow down a bit and paint the picture for you. Rusty Hollow wasn't a fancy place. The streets were made of dirt, not smooth pavement like in big cities. Houses were small, with peeling paint and creaky porches. There was a diner called Pete's Place where people ate greasy burgers and drank coffee all day. Next to it was a gas station with two rusty pumps that barely worked. Down the road, a big old oak tree stood tall, its branches twisting up into the sky like giant arms. That's where Clara and Max were headed this afternoon, just a little walk, same as always. Clara's house was tiny, too. It had white walls that were turning a little yellow from age, and a red door that squeaked when you opened it. Inside, it smelled like cookies, because Clara loved to bake even though she couldn't see the oven. She'd feel the dough with her hands, count the minutes in her head, and pull out perfect chocolate chip cookies every time. People who visited, like old Mrs. Jenkins from next door, would say, "Clara, how do you do it?" She'd just smile and say, "I've got my ways." And Max? He'd sit there, sniffing the air, waiting for a crumb to drop. He never begged, though. Max was too smart for that. Out on the street, Clara moved slow but sure. Her cane tapped the ground in front of her, tap, 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 feeling for rocks or holes. Max stayed right by her left side, his big body brushing against her leg so she'd know he was there. If she turned, he turned. If she stopped, he stopped. They were a team, like best friends who didn't even need to talk. Clara trusted Max with everything, and Max? He'd do anything for Clara. You could tell just by looking at him, those sharp eyes of his were always watching out for her. The people in Rusty Hollow didn't think much of it, though. They'd see Clara and Max walking by and go right back to whatever they were doing. Old Mr. Pete at the diner would wave from his window, then flip a burger. Kids on bikes would zoom past, yelling and laughing, not even glancing at the lady with the cane. To them, Clara was just part of the town, like the old oak tree or the creaky sign at the gas station. Nothing exciting. Nothing special. And Max? Oh, they loved Max, at least, they thought they did. Little Tommy from down the street would run up sometimes and say, "Hi, Max. You're such a good boy." He'd try to pet Max's shaggy head, and Max would let him, wagging his tail just a little. "See?" Tommy would say. "He's the nicest dog ever." The grown ups agreed. "That Max," they'd say, "he's a gentle one. Probably sleeps all day when he's not walking with Clara." They'd chuckle and sip their coffee, thinking they had it all figured out. But they didn't. Not even a little bit. Clara heard those whispers, "Poor blind lady, sweet old pup," and she'd just keep walking, her face calm. She didn't say anything back. She didn't need to. She knew something they didn't. And Max? His sharp eyes would flick toward those people for a second, like he was listening, too. Then he'd look away, staying close to Clara. They had a secret, a big one, and they weren't telling anybody. Not yet. Let's talk about Clara for a minute. She wasn't always in Rusty Hollow. She moved there years ago, when Max was still young and bouncy. Back then, her hair wasn't all gray, it had some brown in it, and she laughed a little louder. Nobody knew much about where she came from. She just showed up one day with Max, bought that little house with the red door, and settled in. When people asked, "Where you from, Clara?" she'd smile and say, "Oh, here and there." That was it. No big story, no details. People figured she didn't like to talk about it, so they stopped asking. Max was different back then, too. His fur was shiny and brown, no gray at all. He'd tug at his leash sometimes, full of energy, but Clara would laugh and say, "Easy, boy." They'd walk all over town together, exploring every corner. Even then, people didn't pay much attention. "New lady and her dog," they'd say, then go back to their lives. Clara and Max didn't mind. They liked being quiet. They liked being left alone. Now, years later, things were still the same, at least on the outside. Clara's hair was gray, her steps were slower, and Max had those gray patches in his fur. But they still took their walks every day. Out the red door, down the dusty street, past the diner and the gas station, toward the big oak tree. Tap, tap, tap went the cane. Pad, pad, pad went Max's paws. Same old routine. Or so everyone thought. See, that dusty afternoon wasn't just any afternoon. Something was different. You couldn't see it yet, not in the orange sky or the quiet streets, but it was there. Clara felt it. Max felt it, too. His ears perked up a little as they stepped outside, like he heard something far away. Clara's hand tightened on his harness, just for a second. They didn't stop, though. They kept going, slow and steady, like always. What was it? What made this day special? Oh, I can't tell you everything yet, that'd ruin the fun. But I'll give you a hint, Clara and Max weren't what they seemed. The people in Rusty Hollow thought they knew them, poor blind lady, sweet old pup, but they were wrong. Dead wrong. There was something big, something wild, hiding behind those calm steps and sharp eyes. A secret so cool it'd make your jaw drop. Think about it. Clara couldn't see, but she wasn't helpless. She baked cookies, walked the streets, lived her life all without her eyes. That takes guts, right? And Max, sure, he looked like an old dog, but those eyes of his? They weren't sleepy or lazy. They were awake. They were ready. Ready for what? Huh? That's the question, isn't it? Let's zoom in on that moment. Clara stepped out her door, the wood creaking under her shoes. The wind brushed her face, carrying that dusty smell she knew so well. She took a deep breath, like she was tasting the air. Max stood next to her, his big head tilted up, sniffing. His tail wagged one slow, Not fast, then stopped. They stood there together, just for a second, like they were waiting for something. Then Clara said, "Let's go, Max." Her voice was soft, but strong, too. She started walking, cane tapping the ground, tap, tap, tap. Max moved with her, his paws kicking up tiny puffs of dust. They headed down the street, same as always. The orange sun sank lower, shadows stretching long across the road. Everything looked peaceful. Normal. Boring, even. But it wasn't. Not even close. The people watching from their porches or diner windows didn't see it. They didn't notice how Max's ears stayed up, listening. They didn't see the little smile on Clara's face like she knew something fun was coming. They just saw the same old Clara and Max, doing their same old walk. "Poor blind lady," they'd whisper. "Sweet old pup." Wrong. So wrong. Clara wasn't poor or weak. Max wasn't sweet or old, not in the way they thought. Something big was hiding there, right in front of everyone. A secret bigger than Rusty Hollow, bigger than the diner or the oak tree or anything else in that dusty little town. What was it? Oh, you're gonna find out soon, I promise. But not yet. We've got more to see, more to hear, before the big surprise hits. Imagine you're there, standing on the side of the street. You see Clara and Max coming your way. Tap, tap, tap goes the cane. Pad, pad, pad go the paws. The sun's almost gone now, just a sliver of orange peeking over the hills. The air's getting cooler, the shadows darker. You wave at Clara, even though she can't see you. Max looks at you, those sharp eyes locking onto yours for a split second, then looks away. They keep walking, slow and steady. What do you think? Are they just a lady and her dog? Or is there more? Maybe you're starting to wonder. Maybe you're thinking, hey, something's up here. And you'd be right. Something is up. Something huge. Something that's gonna shake this little town and everyone in it. But for now, Clara and Max just keep going. Down the street, past the gas station, toward the big oak tree. The town watches or doesn't watch, and life rolls on. The secret stays quiet, tucked away behind Clara's calm steps and Max's sharp eyes. It's there, waiting, ready to jump out when you least expect it. So stick around, okay? Don't go anywhere. This dusty afternoon in Rusty Hollow is about to get wild. Clara and Max have a story to tell, a big one, and you're not gonna want to miss a single second of it. What's their secret? What's hiding behind that cane and those paws? You'll see soon enough. Get ready, it's gonna be awesome. Clara loved her walks with Max. Every day, they'd step out of her little house with the red door and head down Main Street. It wasn't a fancy street, just a dusty road in the tiny town of Rusty Hollow. But Clara didn't care. She liked the feel of the air on her face, even though she couldn't see it. Her cane went tap, tap, tap on the ground, and Max's big paws went pad, pad, pad right next to her. They were a team, and those walks were their special time. Main Street wasn't long. It had a few places Clara knew by heart, even without her eyes. First, they'd pass Pete's Diner, where the smell of burgers and fries floated out the open window. Then came the gas station, with its two rusty pumps that creaked when someone filled up their car. After that, way down the road, stood the old oak tree, big and tall, with branches that looked like they were reaching for the sky. Clara couldn't see any of it, but she knew it was there. Max guided her past it all, slow and steady, like always. That day started out normal. The sun was up, the sky was blue, and a little breeze was blowing dust around. Clara stepped onto Main Street with her cane in one hand and Max's harness in the other. Tap, tap, tap. Pad, pad, pad. They were crossing the street, heading toward the diner, when everything changed. Trouble rolled into town, big, loud, mean trouble. It came on wheels. 5 motorcycles roared down Main Street, so loud the ground shook a little. The noise hit Clara's ears like a big bang, but she didn't jump. She just tilted her head, listening. Max's ears perked up, too, standing straight like little triangles on his shaggy head. The motorcycles stopped right in the middle of the street, engines growling like angry dogs. And the guys riding them. They weren't nice. There were 5 of them, big, tough-looking bikers. They wore black leather jackets with white skulls stitched on the back. The skulls had empty eyes and creepy grins, like something from a scary movie. The bikers had helmets, but they took them off, showing messy hair and tough faces. Their laughs were loud and mean, bouncing off the buildings on Main Street. They didn't look like they belonged in quiet little Rusty Hollow. They looked like trouble, and they were. Clara kept walking, slow and steady, her cane tapping the ground. Max stayed close, guiding her across the street. That's when the bikers spotted her. Their eyes locked onto her like hawks spotting a mouse. She didn't see them, of course she couldn't, but she heard their engines and felt the air get heavy. The bikers grinned at each other, like they just found something fun to play with. One of them spoke first. His name was Spike. He was the biggest of the bunch, with a scruffy beard that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. His teeth showed when he grinned, but it wasn't a nice grin, it was nasty, like a wolf about to bite. "Hey, old lady," he shouted, his voice loud and rough. "What's a blind bat like you doing out here? Get lost." He leaned forward on his motorcycle, pointing at Clara like she was a joke. The other bikers laughed big, ugly laughs that made the air feel meaner. They revved their engines vroom, vroom, so loud it shook the windows of Pete's diner. Old Mr. Pete peeked out from inside, frowning, but he didn't come out. The kids on their bikes down the street stopped pedaling and stared. Everyone heard it, but nobody moved. The bikers were in charge now, or so they thought. Clara didn't stop. She didn't jump or yell back. Her face stayed calm, like she didn't even hear Spike's nasty words. Tap, 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 her cane kept going. Pad, 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 Max kept walking. She was crossing the street, slow as ever, like nothing was wrong. But something was wrong. The bikers weren't done. Another one spoke up. His name was Joey. He was skinnier than Spike, with a pointy nose and a sneer that twisted his face. "Ah, look at her mutt," he said, pointing at Max. "Bet that dog's as useless as she is." He laughed again, kicking his boot against the ground. A little cloud of dust puffed up, floating toward Clara and Max. The other bikers, three more with tough faces and loud voices, joined in. "Yeah," one yelled. "Stupid old dog," said another. They all laughed harder, circling their bikes closer. The motorcycles moved like sharks swimming around a little fish. They rolled forward, then back, then forward again, kicking up more dust. It got in Clara's face, but she didn't cough or wave it away. She just kept walking. Max's ears twitched once, twice, like he was listening to every word, every sound. His sharp eyes flicked toward the bikers for a second, then back to the road. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stayed by Clara's side, big and quiet. Anyone else might have been scared. Imagine it, 5 big, mean guys on loud bikes, yelling and laughing at you. Most people would have run, or cried, or shouted back. Not Clara. She didn't even blink. Well, she couldn't, but you know what I mean. Her face was still calm, like the bikers were just noisy flies buzzing around. She gripped Max's harness a little tighter, her fingers curling around the leather strap. Not scared tight. Steady tight. Like she was ready for something. The bikers didn't notice that. They were too busy being loud and mean. Spike revved his engine again, vroom, and rolled his bike closer. "What's the matter, old lady?" he yelled. "Can't hear me? Too blind to see us?" He laughed so hard he almost fell off his seat. Joey kicked more dust, aiming it right at Clara's feet. "Go home, you and your dumb dog," he shouted. The others hooted and hollered, their voices mixing with the rumble of their bikes. Inside Pete's diner, people watched through the window. Old Mr. Pete shook his head, muttering, "Those boys are trouble." A lady named Mrs. Jenkins, who lived next to Clara, frowned and said, "Poor Clara. She doesn't deserve this." A kid named Tommy, who liked petting Max, peeked out and whispered, "Leave them alone." But nobody went outside. They just watched, like it was a show on TV. The dust kept flying. The bikes kept roaring. The bikers kept yelling. "Hey, blind bat." Spike called again. "You lost? Need help finding your way?" He made a big fake crybaby face, rubbing his eyes like he was teasing her. Joey added, "Maybe your mutt can carry you home if he's not too old." They laughed and laughed, their voices bouncing down Main Street. Clara heard it all. She couldn't see the bikers, but she didn't need to. She knew where they were: Spike's loud mouth on her left, Joey sneering on her right, the others rumbling behind. Her cane tapped the ground, tap, 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 like it was keeping time. Max's paws stayed steady, pad, 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 like he wasn't bothered at all. But something was happening. Could you feel it? Something was brewing, like a pot of water about to boil over. Let's slow down and look closer. Clara wasn't just any lady. She'd been blind her whole life, sure, but that didn't make her weak. She'd learned to listen, to really hear things. The wind, the birds, the sound of Max's breathing. She could tell where a voice came from just by its echo. And those bikers. She heard every word, every laugh, every rev of their engines. She didn't miss a thing. Max wasn't just any dog, either. His fur might have been shaggy and a little gray, but his body was strong. His legs were thick, his chest was wide, and those sharp eyes. They saw everything. When Spike yelled, Max's ears twitched. When Joey kicked dust, Max's nose wrinkled. He didn't move fast or bark loud, not yet, but he was watching. Listening. Waiting. The bikers didn't see that. They didn't think Clara or Max were anything special. To them, she was just an old, blind lady, slow and helpless. Max was just an old dog, lazy and useless. They kept circling, their bikes making tight loops around Clara and Max. Dust flew up in clouds, sticking to Clara's shoes and Max's fur. The noise was so loud it hurt your ears. Vroom, vroom, vroom. The yelling was meaner now, too. Get out of here! Spike shouted. You're in our way. Joey added, yeah, take your mutt and disappear. Clara kept walking. Tap, tap, tap. She didn't speed up or slow down. Her face stayed calm, almost too calm. Like she knew something the bikers didn't. Max stayed close, his big body brushing her leg. His ears kept twitching, his eyes kept watching. The bikers were loud, but Max was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Spike didn't like that. He wanted Clara to be scared. He wanted her to run or yell or cry. Hey, he barked, rolling his bike right in front of her. He stopped so close she almost bumped into it. Her cane tapped the wheel tap and she stopped. Max stopped, too, standing tall next to her. You deaf now, too? Spike said, leaning forward. Move it, or I'll make you. The other bikers cheered. Yeah, Spike. Joey yelled. Show her. They revved their engines again, vroom, and the noise bounced off the diner and the gas station. Dust swirled around Clara and Max, but she didn't move. She just stood there, cane in one hand, harness in the other. Max's head tilted a little, like he was sizing Spike up. Inside the diner, Mrs. Jenkins whispered, "Oh no, this is bad." Mr. Pete gripped a frying pan, like he might run out and help. But he didn't. Nobody did. They just watched, holding their breath. The air felt heavy now, like a storm was coming. The bikers were loud and mean, but Clara? She was still. Max was still. Something big was about to happen, you could feel it in your bones. Spike grinned, thinking he'd won. What's wrong, old lady? He said. Scared yet? He laughed, and the others joined in. Joey kicked more dust, aiming for Max this time. Stupid dog, he shouted. Do something. The bikers hooted, their bikes rumbling like thunder. Clara's hand tightened on the harness again, just a little. Her lips moved, but she didn't say anything loud. Maybe a whisper. Maybe nothing. Max's ears flicked back, then forward. His eyes locked onto Spike, sharp and bright. The bikers didn't notice. They were too busy laughing, too busy being mean. But you could feel it, right? Something was brewing. Something big. Clara wasn't scared. Max wasn't useless. The bikers thought they were tough, but they didn't know who they were messing with. Not yet. The tension was thick, like the air before a lightning strike. What was going to happen? Oh, it was coming, and it was going to be wild. Let's stretch this out more, because this moment is juicy. Picture Main Street right then. The diner's windows were fogged up from people pressing their faces against them. The gas station guy, old Hank, stepped outside with a broom, like he might sweep the bikers away, but he just stood there, staring. The old oak tree down the road swayed a little in the breeze, like it was watching, too. Spike's bike was shiny and black, with flames painted on the sides. His leather jacket creaked when he moved, and his boots were scuffed from kicking things like dust, or maybe people. Joey's bike was smaller, red, and scratched up, but just as loud. The other three bikers, let's call them Rick, Tony, and Buzz, had bikes that matched their tough looks. Rick had a scar on his cheek. Tony had a missing tooth. Buzz wore sunglasses, even though the sun was almost down. They kept circling, their wheels crunching the dirt. "Come on, old lady," Spike yelled. "Say something." He revved his engine so loud it made a kid down the street cover his ears. Joey laughed and tossed an empty soda can toward Clara. It bounced clank, clank on the ground, missing her by inches. "Oops," Joey said, pretending it was an accident. The others cracked up, slapping their knees. Clara didn't flinch. Tap, tap, tap. She moved her cane forward, past Spike's bike, like he wasn't even there. Max stepped with her, his big paw steady. Spike's grin faded a little. "Hey," he snapped. "I'm talking to you." He rolled his bike closer again, almost touching her. The engine growled right in her face. Max's ears twitched again. His tail stopped moving. His sharp eyes narrowed, just a tiny bit. Clara's hand stayed tight on the harness. Her face? Still calm. Too calm. The bikers didn't see it, but something was shifting. The air felt tighter, like it was holding its breath. The yelling, the engines, the dust, it was all loud and big, but Clara and Max? They were quiet and small. And that made it scarier, somehow. Joey kept going. "Look at that mud," he said, pointing at Max. "He's shaking, he's so scared." Max wasn't shaking, not even a little, but Joey laughed anyway. Rick chimed in, "Yeah, bet he runs away if we get closer." Tony nodded, "Stupid dog can't do nothing." Buzz just smirked, revving his bike vroom, to make more noise. They were wrong. So wrong. Max wasn't scared. Clara wasn't helpless. The bikers thought they were big and tough, but they didn't know what was coming. The tension was building, like a rubber band stretched tight. Snap, it was going to break soon. You could feel it, right? Something big, something wild, was about to explode on Main Street. Clara took another step. Tap, tap, tap. Max moved with her. Pad, pad, pad. Spike's face turned red. "Stop ignoring me," he shouted, slamming his hand on his bike. The others stopped laughing, watching him. Joey kicked more dust. Rick revved his engine. Tony cracked his knuckles. Buzz tilted his head, like he was waiting for a fight. And Clara? She just kept walking. Max stayed by her side. The bikers were loud and mean, but they didn't see it yet. They didn't see the storm coming. But it was there, oh, it was there. Stick around, because this is just the start. Things are about to get crazy.